right, excellent. So we're going to go down the line, and just if you want to introduce what each of your companies does. SAP.io is a fund that out of SAP, but I want to make sure that everyone knows what each of your companies does and how it relates to the enterprise.
SAP.io is a new division within SAP. We invest and incubate in early stage enterprise SaaS companies from seed to Series A. And we've invested in about 9 companies last year, incubated a total of about 30 companies over the last 2 years.
I am Jon Lee. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ProsperWorks. We are the #1 CRM for companies using G Suite. We're also the only CRM recommended by Google and also invested by Google. And we are solving the hardest problem in CRM today, which is that 47% fail because of lack of adoption. And so I invite you guys to check out the product and look forward to this afternoon.
Hi, my name's Karl. I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called Lucid Software. Our main product is called Lucid Chart. So it started out as a sort of general purpose diagramming application. But what we're really doing today is we're helping people map out any kind of complicated and sophisticated process or system that has complex relationships, and really be able to understand that and derive insights and create clarity for an organization.
All right. So one of the first things that you have to do when you begin to determine that you're selling to the enterprise is determine that that's your target market. So each of you have a different path into getting into enterprise sales, starting in SMB primarily. How did you each transition from SMB to the enterprise world?
So we started out in SMB for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's just something I'm passionate about. I've actually been an entrepreneur 3 other times. I've built and sold 3 companies, and just want to help guys like you who are changing the world. So we focused on that market. 2, we build for Google, and a lot of the companies that use Google are modern startups like you guys, and that market's about 10 billion, so it was huge. And then 3, when you're a startup, you're always looking for that next round of funding. And so for us, focusing on SMB was really about delivering just enough features to be able to be effective for our customers, but also enough differentiation for us to iterate very quickly. What we found is that as we built more functionality for our SMB customers, we got pulled into the mid-market, then we got pulled into the enterprise. And I think a lot of you will start seeing that if you build a solid sort of basic foundation within SMB. And so we will just continue that rise, and we typically, what we do is we attack a vertical, then we go horizontal, and then lather, rinse, and repeat.
So we see a lot of startups that come through our Foundry program as well as through our fund. Many times on the Foundry side, we look for companies that are very focused on a point solution, but have a large vision on how they want to change the industry that affects an enterprise. And if they're successful in that point solution and it maps to a larger ecosystem, we know that there's potential for them to kind of land and expand and actually build more features and product roadmaps by talking to customers directly and really understanding what they're building for the long term versus trying to focus on that out of the gate.
Yeah, I would say our experience is very similar to ProsperWorks and what Jon mentioned. I think we started with SMB as maybe many of you have, because it's the easiest thing to do. I mean, we had built a great product, we put it out there, you put up a website, you throw some SEO at it, and all of a sudden you've got people showing up. And so our business started very much in a self-serve fashion. People would find us, pay us online with a credit card, very little interaction. And again, we were also pulled up market. We started to see larger customers who would be interested in talking with us, but they required a little bit more in the sales process in terms of hand-holding, a little bit more on the support side, a little bit more some different things on the product side. And obviously the opportunity there is pretty large. I think when you get to a certain scale, you realize that it's pretty hard to continue scaling a company purely at the SMB phase. I mean, there are companies that have done that, but those are, you really have to be like pretty ubiquitous, usable for everyone. And so the opportunity on the enterprise presented itself, and it was a natural evolution.
Yeah, and just sort of harmonizing off of that, I would say that, for ProsperWorks, we grew very quickly because our traffic was all inbound, and that inbound was growing fast, but we wanted to grow even faster. As we're able to access larger customers, the ACVs and ultimately the LTVs went up. We found that larger customers were stickier, and that opened up basically more CAC, right? So we could actually spend more money on sales and marketing. We could open up different methods like outbound, account-based marketing, and so forth. And so as you move up market, or if you target up market, the nice thing about that is that you're able to deploy all these different types of sales and marketing techniques. And if you get your efficiency down, you get your payback down, then it just basically becomes a capital arbitrage, right? You raise money from a VC, you get $1, you spend it, you get $1 back by the end of the year. That dollar is worth, let's say, an enterprise value to revenue multiple of 10. So you just created $10 in enterprise value by spending $1. And so you just lather, rinse, and repeat until you build $1 billion business.
Yeah, at the same time, though, focus is, I think, really important, because if you're selling to everybody, you're selling to nobody. And unless you really understand who you're selling to and how that works, it's difficult. You can't hire enterprise salespeople out of the gate and expect them to work in a startup infrastructure, because the people you bring to the table to actually interact with enterprise clients, serve them, close them, and then do the customer success piece after, very much sometimes a very different team than when you're serving an SMB space and when you're kind of moving up that food chain.
Let's tee off of that. What is the skill set that you are looking for, maybe early stage versus later stage when you have moved into the enterprise space? When you're looking to hire your first sales reps?
I'll take a stab at that. I think we are very still figuring it out. I wouldn't say that it's a never-ending process, right? So I think...
You're supposed to tell us the answer.
Oh, sorry. I'll turn to one of these gentlemen. I think at the early phase, what you're looking for is you're looking for someone who can be creative and innovative and move quickly and try lots of different things, and isn't dead set on this is the way I've done it before, this is the way I have to do it because that's all I understand. I think you're looking for someone who's nimble. But what I'm saying is in our phase, we're still looking for that, right? Like as we're going into enterprise, the enterprise sales rep is very different from sort of your inbound, more transaction oriented. With a transactional model, with a lot of SMB clients, we could hire pretty junior people. But as you start to try to have more meaningful conversations and offering solutions to people, you need to have a more sophisticated conversation. That means people who have done that before. You need to give them a longer lead time. So experimenting with what the ramp on a sales rep is. We mistakenly thought our enterprise reps, as we were transitioning, they should be able to ramp in 3 months because that's what our SMB corporate reps were doing, and we were, sorely disappointed when that didn't happen. And so there are all sorts of adjustments that you have to make.
So when we talk to startups, the ones I get excited about from a sales perspective are those that hire salespeople that came out of a product background, particularly in the early side when they're talking to enterprises, because when they're talking to customers, they're learning about what their product should and shouldn't do and what price points they need to sell at. That ability to listen to customers and bring that feedback to an engineering team, to a product team, I think is monumental as you're developing and growing. If you hire pure salespeople out of the gate and you still pre-revenue or early revenue, I think somewhat a mistake. I think it's a better bet is to hire fantastic marketing people, augment that with SDRs and some great automated marketing strategies and automated sales strategies to kind of get that needle moving. But really focus your first salesperson, somebody that understands product and can translate those features and functionalities back to your product team.
Yeah, I would harmonize off. That was our experience also, which is we hired a mid-market sales rep from Salesforce, and he actually became a product manager. And it was all about understanding about what the customer needed and what did it take to actually get them to buy something. And then when we started to formalize and scale that sales team, the type of attributes we looked for in our early salespeople was really, tenacity and grit. It was really the willingness to win and that commitment to winning. And it was 3 is sort of self-awareness, the ability to be coached. And as we hired more senior people on the AE side, what we'd look for is be able to really understand the customer's problem and articulate it very quickly, and how our solution would actually help them do it. And so if I were to give any advice, when you start scaling your sales team, I'd always hire in pairs or in multiples, because friendly competition is always a good thing, and you'll never know how someone is doing unless you can kind of benchmark them against someone else.
Yeah, the last thing I would add to John's comment is, as you're growing, if you want to go after different verticals, different areas wherever your customers live, domain expertise speaks volumes when you're actually selling to enterprises. The ability to understand their business out of the gate, but them not having to explain what their pains are, and you really focus on much more of a relationship selling and much more of a conveyance of the product and solution, goes a long way in them feeling comfortable buying from you versus somebody else.
All right, and then just out of curiosity, I know that you all probably remember, how did you get your very first customer? You know, the one that isn't your family or your friend that you coaxed into trying your platform. How did you get that person to use your product?
Yeah, so for us, since we built the CRM for Google, we listed our app in the Google Apps Marketplace. And so right away, we started getting inbound leads, and many of them end up using the product.
Yeah, for us, it's interesting. There's two answers to that question. There was one, our sort of self-serve product, and interestingly, my co-founder Ben had put the product out and written some bloggers and got traffic, and he got this guy in Australia, of all things, who was running a consulting firm, teaching sort of public speaking and to use the product, and he was the first paying customer. Also turned out into one of our first investors, but.
Turned you into a global company too.
That's right. So those were the first revenue was international. But in terms of when you talk about shifting to more enterprise, that was a situation where you have to sort of listen and hear things that may not fit what you're expecting to hear. So these were inbound requests that were not asking for the product that was off the shelf the way it was, but they saw an analogy there. It was sort of 60 to 80% of what they needed, and they said, "Hey, we love what you're doing. It's not really what we need. What we need is something a little bit different here." And we're not a custom development shop. We don't want to be a custom development shop, but you can learn a lot if you hear things over and over again, and it might be worth investing in some area, because as you go into the enterprise, I think Lucid Chart started out as a pretty horizontal tool, but it's hard to sell that into an enterprise, because in an enterprise, someone's looking for a solution to a problem that they have, not for a generic toolbox. And so listening to those can be
I think all enterprises think they're unique, and they all want some level of customization and kind of changes to a software platform. Again, to Karl's point, I think you find some commonalities around what to build into a product, what not to build in a product, which is custom, which is not. In my experience, I've seen probably, when you get to the enterprise level, you should expect about a 20-25% professional services mix. Even Salesforce and others who claim to be fully off the shelf and in the cloud still have a lot of customization that kind of come with it. And I think most enterprise SaaS, he still has that. In terms of getting your first enterprise client, many companies have to go through POCs and run that gauntlet. So there's a POC gauntlet where you may be able to extract a small amount of cash, and then you can move on to actually get the commercial deal. But the definition of what success looks like, I think, is key. And to have those conversations as early as possible to figure out how do you move past a POC into a full commercial deal are ones that we encourage people to have on a regular basis.
All right, and then John, you touched on being in Google's marketplace. There is a huge advantage in the enterprise in being in other marketplaces and also forming strategic partnerships. Can you talk about how each of those is played into your companies?
Yeah, so we have a really deep partnership with Google, and the way we built it was really a symbiotic relationship, which was we helped Google build its extensibility story by deeply integrating our app with Google. And so they saw that, and that we embodied a lot of Google's design principles. And so now they promote ProsperWorks, they sell ProsperWorks, we're merchandised in multiple buy flows. So naturally, both from a branding standpoint as well as a discovery perspective, Google has been really helpful for us. Another series of partnerships we've built is really around resellers. So specifically resellers that sell G Suite, right? And so there's a lot of regions where we don't have a sales presence, we don't market to, and so these resellers actually help us market in those international areas. We provide them with market development funds, we provide them with leads, and then we get them spinning and going with marketing and collateral, and then they basically generate leads for ourselves and actually help us close deals. And the economics of that actually works out better than if we were to build an office out there ourselves.
Yeah, our story is similar. We were early partners in the Google ecosystem, both on the Chrome Web Store individual side as well as the Google Apps Marketplace, and that was very fruitful. I think one of the key lessons there, I think, is be early. If you have an opportunity to be part of the launch, I think getting in on the ground floor is always helpful because there is a momentum that builds there. But since then, yeah, we've found great partnerships, and in being there with Slack and being in the Atlassian marketplace and suite of products. I think those are all very fruitful, and those are ways for us. Our users are not exclusively users of those platforms, but it turns out that a fair number of our customers, even ones that we have sourced and sold directly, also use those applications, so it increases the value proposition and the stickiness to them.
So at SAP, we often get the request of, we'd love to meet your sales force, meet your clients, because we know we could sell a lot of them. And it's difficult for us to introduce startups into that mix, partly because we don't know if they're going to break, if they can meet some of the stress and strain, if they redline. At the same time, when we look for good partnerships, SAP.io is pushing a new approach to working with startups where it's not necessarily building on top of SAP and our platforms, but building with, where we look for access to our data and APIs as a great way to build stickiness with our clients and a great way to build the next generation of startups in the B2B space. So when we bring companies into that mix, we look for tight kind of cohesion, and do they fill gaps, do they strengthen our current value proposition, and can we help take them to market in unique ways? At the same time, we have a tremendous reseller channel that spreads worldwide in areas where we don't have a lot of presence, or we define SMB in a very strange way. We define SMB as $500 million to $1 billion. So anything in that SMB space or below, we sell through channel partners and resellers, many of which are doing $20, $30, $50 million a year just on services alone.
That's incredible. So we started to talk about your first customers. We started to talk about strategic partnerships on scaling. What are some other ways that you've used to scale to, your first 1,000, 100,000 customers? How do people get there? It's a giant leap. There's differences in people and systems. And what's your advice for our founders today who are in the enterprise looking to scale to that level?
Well, first you need a great CRM. And then after that, it's really for us, it's been about optimization. So we are very ruthless about first outlining the sales waterfall. So basically from marketing qualified lead all the way down to cash, what are all the events that occur? So for us, we have we get leads that come in, SDRs call those leads, they send them to AEs who then demo, and then ultimately close the deal. And so we analyze everything from what is the number of touches that an SDR should have to a particular prospect. When should they do it? How do we do the handoff? How do we make sure the customer actually shows up for the demo? And then what should be in the demo pitch itself? Do we break it out by vertical? Do we change our pitch? And we're constantly A/B testing that. And we take like a portfolio approach where we have big swings, and then we also have sort of bunts and singles. And so we're looking at that flow through every step of the way that ultimately drives sales productivity. And so in order to do that, you have to have the visibility in the data, and your team needs to be data oriented, and your team needs to be willing to do and try different things. And as another positive consequence, as you scale your sales team, people are people. They're going to do what they think is going to be successful. But when you have the data to show them, hey, if you do this activity, if you follow up at this cadence, if you provide them these materials, the data's there. So that's going to help you scale as an organization as you go from 2 to 5 to 10 to 20 to now 50 reps, right? So I would say just optimize, optimize, optimize. And then also on the culture front, I think that's also really important. So culture of transparency, mutual competitiveness, being clear about how you hire, fire, train people. All those things are really important to scale to 1,000 or more customers.
Yeah.
So I think enterprise sales is not for the faint of heart. These are relationship sales. They take a long time. They take 6-9 months, sometimes even longer. And it's a game of patience. It's building a relationship, showing value, continually working a pipeline that may not materialize for a while. And which is why it's difficult to kind of move up that food chain. And why when a VC finds a company selling to enterprises that's just killing it, it becomes a unicorn very quickly because those sales cycles are just so long in general. That being said, there's a lot of value in going after enterprise because it is a higher price point. It does give you a more sustainable revenue stream because these contracts tend to be longer. But if you can't afford that, and many startups cannot, keep that in mind. And the SMB space is a great way to validate what you're doing, to continue to build your product, build your pipelines, and move up that ladder in a very cautious and manageable way.
Yeah.
This reminded me of a quote that one of my mentors actually told me. There's only 2 professions in the world that have a scoreboard, and it's sales and sports. And so I think you either hit your number or you don't in sales, and there's not a lot of wiggle room if
Right.
the answer is yes or no. You
Yeah.
hit the revenue or not.
And tactically, I'd suggest looking at 2 things, right? So the first is having the right sales team and the sales organization. And so we sort of alluded to that before. As you move up market, if you're starting with SMB, the type of person you're looking for is very likely going to be different than where you started. And you have to realize that and structure your organization appropriately. The second is on the sales strategy side, you're going to want to try different things, but the way that you structure your sales your sales org as well as your sales comp can have very important ramifications. So if you give people high commission but pretty low bases, that is going to incentivize them and force them to look very near term, short term, as opposed to trying to build sort of a more strategic long term play, and that may not be the wise thing at the beginning. On the flip side, if you give people sort of a long ramp with a lot of buffer and a lot of comfort, it'll take you a little while to figure out whether that's working or not. So you have to be nimble and sort of balance those.
Excellent. We have time for one more question here, and then we'll wrap it up. What is one thing that you learned from, maybe a mistake that you made, that you can teach all of the founders in the audience not to make that mistake? What would you tell them?
Yeah, for us, it was we chased a really big deal that required us to change our roadmap substantially away from our target customer. And we ultimately won that customer, and that customer is really sticky, and they love the product. But it actually set us back for our target market. And so I would just be really conscientious that when you see those big dollar figures in front of you, make sure you're thinking about the long-term success of your business, because decisions like that, while it might feel great for the quarter, could end up mortgaging the future of your roadmap. So I would be careful with that.
So I'd echo some of that. I mean, I've been a serial entrepreneur before I came to SAP, and one big thing I will always tell people is that not all revenue is good revenue, and you have to really look at the revenue that you're bringing in and see if it's accretive to you building your business, or if it just hits your short-term goal of paying the bills. And if it's just paying the bills, sometimes it's not the best revenue because it takes you down rat holes and it keeps you from building a bigger company.
Yeah, for us, I think the lesson that jumps out to me is that product marketing and making sure you have the right fit for the enterprise persona that you're trying to target, and maybe even before that, picking the right persona. So as I mentioned before, we started out as a very horizontal application, and that's great in the SMB space, but as we pivoted into more enterprise, I think we had to figure out who exactly is it that we're trying to sell to, because to have those value-based conversations that lead to the larger ACV, you need to be solving someone's problem, and you need to figure out what problem that is that you want to be solving, and then build your product around that, as well as the pitch and the messaging around that.
All right, thank you so much. Everyone give it a nice startup grind round of applause.